And the carb breakfast, one of the things with a lot of the kind of the fed versus fasted studies is they might feed someone like 200 grams of carbs at breakfast, which is just not realistic. So for me, it
Yeah,
was like
it's
it was
been,
1 gram per kilogram. So like
okay.
70 grams of carbs, 75, something realistic.
Yeah.
Essentially a jam sandwich and some sports drink. But fat oxidation, this is not surprising that it is higher in the fasted state than if you've had a carbohydrate-rich breakfast. But one of the newer areas of research that I certainly wasn't the first, but it's I think pretty interesting is the low carb breakfast. So having a protein shake and or protein and fat, you're going to burn essentially, maybe not exactly, but almost as much fat as if you were in the fasted state, but you're going to be fed. And this really then, when we think about the higher level population, the higher level athletes, the biggest, in my mind, the biggest drawback from fasted training for someone that's very fit is that they're burning a lot of calories in a given session, right?
Yeah.
And not only are they training higher amounts per week, but so per hour, someone a very high level athlete can burn 1,000 calories pretty easily, whereas a lower level athlete might burn 300 or 400 calories on a kind of an easy ride, let's say. And so the hole they're going to dig themselves is much greater at a higher level when you have a higher VO2 max and things. So that means a fasted training session is going to really put them in the hole calorie wise.
Yeah.
And so there's a real utility if you want to burn more fat during, let's say, a zone 2 kind of bike ride. Without digging yourself such a calorie hole, you can have a low carb breakfast. You can have eggs and avocado, or you can have a protein shake and peanut butter or something, get
Yeah.
those calories and not really impair your fat oxidation. And that I think is an underappreciated strategy. I found that actually in the survey, in the first study that like asked how many people did a low carb breakfast, and very few people did. So I think that's one of the most underutilized things is for someone that wants to kind of get the quote benefits, and we could talk about if there are any in a minute, but for someone that wants to kind of get the physiology of a fasted session without creating such a big energy deficit, I really see a protein fat breakfast as a really good alternative.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great win that definitely translates well to even team sport for certain athletes, depending on the schedule and obviously the bias in team sport towards the end of the day. Games are at night.
Mm.
What the athletes are doing in the morning. There's certainly a lot of room there to be able to, like you said, preparing for the session to come, but also recovering from the sessions that happened yesterday and the day before as well. So being able to get that protein bolus in the
Yeah.
morning is a big one. Now, anything else on the elites there? Or should we shift over to?
Well, I
Yeah.
think also worth noting. So one of the reasons people generally avoid fasted training is that they say that they won't perform as well. That really becomes apparent after about 75 to 90 minutes, or
Okay.
even let's just say an hour. So if your session, we're not talking about race performance here. I wouldn't, no one should race fasted, but like an interval workout, right? Some
For
people
sure.
say, it's generally recommended to eat before interval training sessions, but some people don't want to do that, and if the exercise is longer than an hour, there's going to start to be a benefit of fed versus fasted training.
Hmm.
But most people, or many people, and maybe at the lower level, the leads might train longer. But a lot of people do an interval workout, and it's an hour or so.
Yeah.
You do a warm up, knock out, whatever your intervals, and you're done around an hour. What I found there was no performance difference between fed, fasted, or fed carbs or fed protein. And
Okay.
there was no difference in hunger also. So basically, one of the big takeaways, again, from my perspective, is if you're doing an interval workout, let's just say like a weekday morning or something, and you don't want to eat, you don't have to. There's no compelling reason it's going to affect your performance. And the reason is your muscle glycogen is the same whether you're fed or fasted. It's you wake up in the morning, your liver glycogen will be depleted, which
Hmm.
is why after around an hour, then you're going to start to see this performance declines. But your muscle glycogen is fine. So your muscle glycogen is going to deplete at the same rate if you're fed or fasted. Like, so if you wake up in the morning and have a bagel and then do your interval workout, or if you just wake up and do it fasted, your muscle glycogen is going to deplete at the same level, and you're going to get through the workout. So for people that like are afraid they're going to be too hungry or bonk during their workout, I don't think I wouldn't expect that to happen. Again, if we're talking about like a 1 hour workout. So I think that's a really important takeaway for people that, you don't need to eat before those kind of sessions.
Seems particularly important for the sort of general public, or oftentimes we'll talk about the coaching staff or performance staff who are trying to stay fit amongst all the demands of
Yeah.
competitive seasons. And it's like that idea of, yeah, not being able to push yourself during a session is certainly one that still percolates around. So knowing that you could get these sessions in under an hour and do some intervals and you could still put out some really good work. Oftentimes they're done early in the morning because people are busy, whether it's work,
Yeah.
teams, kids, the rest of it, and still achieve that performance during the session, right?
Yeah, and so back to the higher level athletes that are training more, I wouldn't recommend that because that's more about they could create a 12 or 1500 calorie deficit
Yeah.
and then add the rest of the training on top of that. So that's not ideal from that standpoint. But from just purely the standpoint of someone training, let's say 8 hours a week or 6, 8, 10 hours a week, they can definitely handle that, and I wouldn't expect any performance declines in that case.
Yeah, context is so key in terms of what the right strategy is to be able to achieve the outcome, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If we circle back to the first section, you mentioned, was there a low carb group that you surveyed as well?
Yeah. I mean, basically across all athletes and kind of separate them by dietary pattern, self-identified dietary pattern. But yeah, the low carbers tend to do more fasted training.
Did they provide a
And again,
rationale for that?
that's the fat oxidation is a big one there.
Yeah, that was their rationale for doing that.
Largely, yeah, that was the biggest reason. And so that kind of dovetails into then one of the next things I did was there's a big emphasis on fat oxidation during training, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, but it's something that a lot of people try to tweak, so that they might do a fasted training session, or they might whatever, avoid sports drink, or there's a lot of things that people will do to try to adjust their fat oxidation during exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was curious kind of how much control, or what are the things that really affect that. So we know that lower intensity work exercise will generally rely more on fat than higher intensity exercise. That's nothing new. And we also know that as exercise duration extends, the relative contribution of fat will go up.
Yeah.
And as you eat versus not eat, like there's a lot of factors individually that we know this lever or that lever will affect like more or less fat. But what I was unclear about was what happens when 2 or 3 of those levers get moved at the same time. Like what happens when you're fasted and you do high intensity, or the duration goes on and your intensity goes up. There's these different combinations that were really unclear. And so did analysis work, kind of trying to understand all the different factors and what's most important for fat oxidation and how much control over it. And kind of the big takeaways are that your daily diet actually has one of the biggest influences on like how much fat you'll burn. Let's just say during a given cycling workout, percentage of fat you're going to burn, for example. That's most driven by like your daily fat intake. So being on a lower carb, higher fat diet is going to crank that up.
Mm-hmm.
And being on a higher carb diet will turn that down. The pre-exercise meal does affect it. So if you have a high carb meal, that's going to adjust your fat oxidation. Duration is a big one though. So as your duration extends, your fat oxidation is going to go up. And this is like supported by many other studies, but it's really interesting that, even if you're taking sports drink during a session, you can still burn a lot of fat as you start riding for 2, 3, 4 hours. You're going to be burning a ton of fat, regardless of essentially if you're fed or fasted, or if you're taking sports drink during. So that's another kind of, from a practical side, I think, thing that people are maybe underappreciating.